Today, the mood in the Islamic Republic, compared with just a year ago, is triumphant. Khamenei's republic has survived sanctions and internal protests. With the help of its great power allies, it has steadied its economy and started to replenish its defenses. When the supreme leader decides to cross that threshold, there is little reason to believe that Israel or the United States intends to stop him with force. On assuming power in 1979, Iran's revolutionaries prided themselves on rejecting the global order. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the country's first supreme leader, declared that his state would be neither east nor west. Khomeini viewed the United States as the great Satan, but in his eyes, godless communism and the Soviet Union were just as baleful. Khomeini's successors were bound to take stock of their revolution. And upon assuming office, the country's new supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, tentatively started to reach out. Tehran maintained its hostility toward the United States, looking for great power patrons. At first, it struggled to find them. Iran began hunting for partners at an inopportune moment, right after the end of the Cold War, when American power was largely uncontested. The Europeans were always willing to trade with Iran, but their investments, even in the oil sector, were made with hesitation. China and Russia were more eager to conduct commerce with Iran, but they did not yet share Tehran's hostility to Washington. In fact, Beijing and Moscow were wary of antagonizing the United States at the height of its post-Cold War power. To feed its growing energy needs, China began purchasing sizable quantities of Iranian oil. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia was in dire economic straits, so it developed a lucrative commercial relationship by selling weapons to Tehran. But neither China nor Russia was willing to forge a serious partnership with the Islamic Republic. Although he certainly desired one, Khamenei could not construct a Eurasian alliance against Washington. Isolated and largely alone in the early 1990s, Rafsanjani and Khamenei amped up the country's clandestine nuclear research, which had commenced in the 1980s during the Iran-Iraq War. In 2002, when a dissident group revealed that the Islamic Republic had a relatively elaborate atomic program, the United States imposed a web of sanctions that, combined with an impoverishing socialist economy, severely limited Iran's capacity to attract foreign investment, trade, and hard currency. The resulting nuclear crisis was a turning point. To blunt U.S. pressure, the country realized it needed Chinese and Russian support. Early on, however, neither great power offered much. As the 2010s began, international events started to break in its favor for Iran. The insurgency in Iraq, fueled and planned in part in Tehran, sapped U.S. willpower in the Middle East. Seeking to establish a new beginning with the Muslim world, and seemingly convinced that long-standing problems with Iran could be overcome through his personal intervention, Obama opened his diplomacy with Khamenei by accepting Iran's most consequential nuclear gains. The eventual 2015 nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, not only greenlighted the Islamic Republic's indigenous uranium enrichment, but also stipulated that after 15 years, the regime would be free to develop industrial-scale enrichment. At a time when Iran's economy was in distress, the nuclear deal both filled the country's coffers and legitimized its atomic aspirations. Following the logic that led to massive Western investment in communist China and post-Soviet Russia, the agreement assumed that if Iran were free to trade, it would turn it into a less threatening, less ideological state. Over the past few years, China has created its own sphere of influence. Beijing has been especially committed to gaining privileged access to the resources of the global south and has made Iran, with its large Middle Eastern footprint, an important part of its outreach. In 2021, China and the Islamic Republic signed a 25-year agreement that allows the Chinese to penetrate nearly all sectors of Iran's economy. Beijing plans to invest in Iran's infrastructure and telecommunications, and it has promised to help develop the Islamic Republic's energy sector and supposedly civilian nuclear industry. Russia is also doing its part to help Tehran. In the first 10 months of 2022, Russian exports to Iran rose by 27%. The two countries have signed a memorandum of understanding that commits Moscow to investing $40 billion in Iranian gas projects. It is easy to see why Russia is lending a hand. Its invasion of Ukraine has left it isolated from many of its traditional partners, but Iran has clearly, surely, and irreversibly sided with Russia. The United States started this war in Ukraine in order to expand NATO toward the east, Khamenei said in March, bolstering Putin's narrative about the conflict. Iran has sold large quantities of drones to Russia. In exchange, Moscow has opened its armory, providing Iran with air defense systems, helicopters, and, soon, advanced aircraft such as the Sukhoi Su-35. Under Biden, Iran increased uranium enrichment levels to 60%, the level needed to make a crude atomic weapon. In January, the IAEA detected an enrichment level exceeding 80%. Khamenei, then, will have done what Khomeini failed to do. He will have ensured the survival of the revolution against its primary enemy, the United States. He will have turned the Middle East into a region where Iran, after 44 years of trying, is the dominant power.